So this is the Bestechman Ronan. I'm going to disassemble this now. I have not disassembled it yet. There are some interesting things that I've noticed from the construction on the outside that should be interesting during disassembly. It's an axis lock knife, so disassembly is going to be a bit more complicated than on some other ones, but it shouldn't be too bad because there's some interesting features here that I think will make it easier. Here is my T6, the pivot is T8, the rest of the bolts are T6. I'm keeping track to see if these bolts are the same length. It looks like they will be, so I think we'll be okay as far as, yeah, those are the same length. So you don't need to keep track of the bolts perfectly on this one. Doesn't look like the pocket clip goes into the liners or into the backspacer like it does on some axis knives. Still being a little bit difficult to get apart, so I'll take the bolts out of the other side as well and see if that does the trick. Okay, so that one is either spinning or something has happened to it, so we'll see about how that went as I get into the rest of this here. Take the tension off, see if the pivot will come out. It looks like it does not want to come out. So I guess I'll take off the pocket clip and see if that helps. Sometimes they have some interesting attachment strategies for pocket clips on these axis lock knives, and the pocket clip kind of holds the knife together. So we'll see if that's the case on this one or not. And what's interesting is these bolts seem to be turning, but they don't seem to be coming out. Okay, so they did come out. So there's that. And now it does want to come apart. Okay, so the pocket clip does go into the side plate. So that does need to come out. This does have somewhat conventional Omega type springs, as Benchmade calls them. But the unconventional bit is you can see the axis lock doesn't have that J channel that it otherwise would. And the springs are actually bent all the way around there, so you can't just take the springs off very easily. What you can do is you can unscrew this. So this is the cap for the axis bar. I guess it's not an axis bar because it doesn't work the same way. You can take the whole thing off rather than popping the spring off and then working it out through that J channel. So that's interesting, different from your typical axis lock type design. This is all very stiff. I'm going to see if I can work it. There we go. Now it's working its way apart. Take the pressure off of the lock. See if we can get it away from that stop pin up there. It's a bit dangerous because I can't take the blade out yet. This pivot pin fits in very tightly, which is what I'm currently having trouble with. Going to have to resort to a screwdriver, which I was hoping to not do. Very stiff. Wow, that's incredibly stiff on there. Which unfortunately means that getting this back together is going to be a chore as well. Okay, so there's the liners. You can see a couple of pins down here in the spacer as well. So it's an incredibly sturdy build, lots of things holding that together. There's the stop pin, which just fits into there. So I do want to stop here and take a moment to point out something that's interesting about this particular lock. So you can see when the knife is in the locked up position here, see how this bar lock, it just barely catches the very end of that blade. I wish that that would sink a little bit further up in like this and hold that on there. As the knife wears, this lock will probably get a little more secure, but that actually worries me a little bit. I mentioned this in the review as well. Kind of an interesting thing. You can see it just barely sits on the edge there. I would like to see it kind of fully up into there. Again, hopefully we'll get better as the knife ages, but it does make me worried for potential lock failure when it is new. Blade also sits very, very firmly on the pivot there. Blade is recessed into the pivot, or the bearings rather, are recessed into the blade there a little bit. I prefer that to be done into the liners. It's not a huge concern, but it does make a difference as far as durability of the blade. Here's the liner on this one. See if I can separate this from the scale. I also want to see what happened to this bolt, because I wasn't sure if this bolt was turning or if it stripped on me as I was turning it. It looks like this bolt actually stripped on me, so I'm not going to be able to get this fully apart because that's still bolted to there. So that's a potential quality issue too. Back spacer will fall off, but this won't come out because that bolt is now stripped. So that's permanently on there now, unless I wanted to cut into this knife with a screwdriver or something. Yeah, the spacer is not turning. That's actually the bit just turning in the bolt. So bit of a quality control issue there. That's a disassembly. All right, so let's go ahead and try the reassembly. Again, I can't get this apart, this screw stripped, which means I can't take this side of the lock apart either because it's through the liner and the G10. So I'm going to go ahead and try and reassemble it from here. Obviously that's a bit of an issue. We'll see if it goes together easier than it came apart. Going to put my pivot back in from this side to make my life easier. Make sure we're nice and clean. These have already been oiled in case you were wondering. Here's my stop pin. Here is the blade, which actually went back on more easily than I expected it to. There's my other bearing. Stop pin fell out. Stop pin goes back there. Now let's see if this other liner will go back on without too much fuss. Okay, so that actually went on a lot easier than I thought it was going to, based on how hard it was to get off. Here is the other side of the lock bar. Here's my T8. Here's the spring in the spring hole. So the pivot, yeah, the pivot had fallen back through. I was pushing the pivot back up in where it goes. There's the liner. Pivot bolt, which is T8. Let's check and make sure. Okay, so that's a little bit too tight on the lock bar. I'm not used to having to set lock bar tension. That's a new interesting one for me. Okay, so the action on that is actually somewhat improved from where it was when I disassembled it. So that's interesting to know. You can actually set the tension on that lock bar. Probably want to put some Loctite on there so that it doesn't shift around on you. But something that you can tune on this knife that I'm not used to seeing be tunable on knives, which is lock bar tension. It'll be interesting to see, now that I have reassembled it and adjusted that tension, if the lock bar engages more fully. So we'll test that out. There's that. It looks like it might. Okay, so not really. So not really any more engagement on there. I was hoping it would engage fully more. You can see I just barely have to move that bar to disengage that lock. So no improvement there, which is too bad. Let's get the clip back on. Two bolts here. Bottom one is tight. Okay, top one is tight. There is your reassembly. Looks like we've got our tightness good. That's the reassembly of the Bestechman Ronan. Hope that is helpful. Like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. Enjoy your day.